Welcome to the Japan Business Show. My name is Eric Ahona, and today I'm talking with Natsuyo Nobumoto Lipschutz. Natsuyo is an award-winning global speaker, a strategy consultant, and a presentation coach. Natsuyo, thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
Natsuyo, since you have such an impressive background of international experience in Western as well as in Japanese working environments, I want to dive right in and ask you, what do you think are the most challenging things about working in a Japanese working environment?
Yeah, one thing, it's the communication skills. I've been giving a strategy consulting for Japanese companies in the US or coming into the US. And no matter how global the company is, no matter how great the strategy is, it always comes down to the cross-cultural communication. Our communication styles are very different between Japan and the US. And in the short terms, Japanese communication style is called high context communication, which relies on nonverbal communications, whereas in the US, it's a low context communication culture, which relies on verbal communications. And we're very far apart. Japan is on one end, far end of high context communication, and the US is on the other end of low context communication. So there's often a lot of communication mistakes. And especially with Japanese business people, they assume a certain thing. They think they can convey their meaning, their intention, the values by saying A. And you're supposed to guess what A means, right? But in the US culture, A just means A. There's no inferences. So I've often seen a lot of failures in US-Japan businesses because of the communication difference. So when you learn to gauge the difference between the US and Japan in terms of communication skills and learn to adapt your communication, that will be the key.
Wonderful. I absolutely agree. And I think I've heard somewhere that the reason for this non-verbal communication culture comes from the very homogeneous culture that we see in Japan. Since we have in the United States such a high rate of immigration, there are so many different cultures, so many different opinions, and it is not possible to not communicate what you mean. You need to communicate even more. That's why it's a very high verbal communication culture in the US, opposed to Japan that has a relatively low immigration. And therefore it is, as the Japanese say, you need to read the air. Kuki o yome.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
This is a very, very interesting component that you're mentioning. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
so
sure.
Coming back to you now a bit, please tell us a bit more about your background and what has led you to your role as being a global speaker, a strategy consultant, and a presentation coach.
Yeah, that's a long history because I've been in this country for 27 years, almost more than half of my life. So I was born and raised in Japan and went to school and everything in Japan. I'm not a Kokushijo or, how do you say that? How do you say Kokushijo in English? I don't know. I grew up in Japan, right? And I didn't come to the US until after I graduated from college. So I went to Waseda University, graduated, and then came to the US because I got my first job at Itochi International in New York. And that was a really funny story that I often hear people say, wow, your first job was in New York. How did you get that? Well, I was very lucky. I had a certain connection with someone in Itochi International in New York. And one time that CEO came to Japan for a business trip, and I had an opportunity to meet him over breakfast at Hotel Okura. And we were talking about some random things. And at the end, he said, so what do you want to do? And where do you want to go? I said, well, Mr. Che, that was his name, Mr. Che, you work in New York, so I want to go to New York. And he says, all right, then you're hired. I was like, wow, seems like I'm going to New York. So that's how I landed my job. And I had no idea that I would spend pretty much the rest of my life here in New York. So back then I was very young, so I didn't think too much about what's going to happen at, in the future. But that was a good thing for me. So I started working for Itochu in New York in steel department first, and then pulp and paper department doing business development. And then I thought I needed to get more management view of the high level view of businesses. And that's when I decided to go to an MBA program at New York University. So I did my MBA, and during the summer, I had an internship at McKinsey, and that was in Japan, and I came back to New York, and I thought I would work for McKinsey in New York. Then 9/11 happened, so everything got canceled. So I was on my own. So what am I going to do? What am I good at? And what do I want to do? And what's required or needed in the market? And when I thought about these three combined, I came up with my own strategy consulting firm to really assist Japanese companies in the US. So that's when I started Aspire Intelligence. That's a strategy consulting firm. And then I encountered this miscommunication cases a lot as a strategy consultant, and I needed to do something about it. They have a strategy. I can help them with a strategy, but I couldn't help them implement a strategy effectively. How do I do that? And long story short, I came up with the organizational development, including corporate trainings, focusing on the team dynamics, team communications, global facilitation skills, and presentation skills and speaking skills. And that's when I founded the second company, Breakthrough Speaking, in 2015. And right now, I'm a strategy consultant, a public speaking coach, and a professional speaker. And I give keynote speeches throughout the US.
Wonderful, wonderful. For those that don't know, Itochu is one of the 5 big trade companies in Japan. It is certainly one of the most traditional Japanese trade companies, and it is very known. And Japanese are basically looking to go into those companies because it secures it has job security, and it has a very renowned name in Japan. And what I also liked is that you mentioned how you started your strategy consulting company, is that you mentioned what am I good at, what does the market need, and what
I want to do.
What do you want to do exactly? Yeah. It reminded me a little bit about the concept of ikigai. I'm sure you've heard about ikigai, right? Ikigai is, I think it has the 4 circles. Is what am I good at? What do I love? What does the market need? And what does the market pay for? Because sometimes the market needs something, but they're not willing to pay for it, right? So the cross section of those 4 circles is the ikigai, or the purpose of being of oneself, right? That was very interesting. Now, let me ask you about the past year. I mean, we kind of have been through the pandemic, restrictions have eased, and it's now easier to do business travel to Japan. Japan is still not 100% fully open, but looking back at the past year, for you personally, what has been an event that has impacted your life in the past year?
This pandemic impacted a lot of people in a lot of different ways, but not necessarily this past year or during pandemic, but I'm going to go back 5 years, 2017. I'm going to be very specific. On February 6th, 2017, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And at that time, my daughter was 5 years old. And when I was diagnosed, 2 things came to my mind. One was obviously about my daughter. I didn't want her to be scared. She's a girl too. I didn't want her to think, oh, am I going to get that too in the future? And I had to stay strong. So I really needed to stay strong for my daughter and for myself as well. So that's the first thing that came to my mind. And the second thing that just popped up in my mind was, this is going to be a great story to tell. And when I realized that I was thinking that way, I thought it was like the other me looking at myself, and I'm like, wow, she thinks that way. Breast cancer is a great storytelling. And then I realized I must be a storyteller, and this must be my life mission. So breast cancer diagnosis reassure to myself that my life mission is to tell stories. And that's when I decided I'm going to be a professional speaker. So breast cancer was a life-changing event. Most people would think it's a negative life event, but for me, I guess I made it, I turned it around so that it's a positive life event for me, that from that point on, I made a commitment to myself that I'm going to be a professional speaker, and I want to tell people not just my story, but how dynamic and how rewarding speaking is. And by speaking about my story, by sharing my story really honestly and openly, I felt like my heart, my soul, my body were healed. So I always tell people that speaking is healing. But it's not, a lot of people are really scared of public speaking. Just like Jerry Seinfeld, the famous comedian, said, the number two fear of people is death, and number one fear is public speaking. So you'd rather be in a casket than than give a eulogy at a funeral, right? So public speaking is not for everybody, but speaking openly and telling your story really opens up your heart and their heart, and you can connect with your audience heart to heart. So it's a great tool. Speaking is a great tool to build relationship. So I really wanted to teach people that speaking is a great tool, not just to disseminate information, but to share your experience and feel the togetherness and feel their hearts. So speaking is healing.
I love how you took your diagnosis that you received, and instead of making it a limitation or an obstacle, instead you saw it as an opportunity to grow and make you just realized how you said, I need to tell this story. And I want to become a storyteller. This is what I want to do. And you made this a reality. And even more than that, you didn't just make it a reality. You are now an award-winning global speaker. You're a TEDx speaker as well. So this is above amazing. But let me ask you, what has led you to become so successful at what you do with public speaking, with being an award-winning speaker, a TEDx speaker? What has made you so successful?
Well, definition of success depends on how you set your success, right? So I'm still in transition. I mean, I'm in progress, right? To be truly successful, whatever the definition of success that might be. But one thing I can say is I've been diligently practicing speaking, not just on my own, but as a small community. I was trained as a professional speaker at a place called Heroic Public Speaking. It's called HPS. And HPS is where professional speakers, you have to be already professional speakers, and you have to qualify to to be enrolled into their program. So there are a lot of other professional speakers who want to take their career to the next step. And we have a certain positive culture to support each other and learn from each other, learn with each other. So I've been meeting with their accountability partner. I have an accountability group of 4 or 5 people, and I meet with them periodically and check in with how they're doing and what was the challenge last week and what's going to be a goal for next week or next month, and what kind of help I need or what help I can provide. So these things we always talk about in this accountability group, and we are growing together. So when you have a group of trusted people who will support you, I think you are one step closer to your success.
Great. So we talked about success. Now let's talk about failure. What's your biggest failure? And let's make it specific in relation to Japan. And what did you learn from that experience?
Yeah, I have a lot of failures, but one of the biggest ones, I have many big ones too, but one of the biggest one is when I just started my own strategy consulting firm. That was back in 2005, a year after I started. I felt confident. I felt I have an MBA and I have a McKinsey experience, and now I have my own strategy consulting firm. I was very, very confident with myself, and I was young too. So one time I was hired by Mr. K. Let's call him Mr. K. And he was a 65 years old former government official, Japanese government official, who's now the chairman of this 4-century-old Japanese craft company. And they used to make samurai swords. So it's that old. And he came to me and said, "You're hired." And I said, "Of course you hired me," right? And I conducted an extensive research and analysis. He had his strategy all laid out, but I made sure that it's going to work. And it turned out it's not going to work based on my research and analysis. And the challenge was I had to tell him that. But I thought, well, as a strategy consultant, that's my job. And if I explain everything in details, he'll understand. No problem. Big problem. I put together a very detailed presentation explaining why his plan is not going to work and why mine would. That was very specific and very logical, and there was no room for argument. And I was so certain that Mr. K would thank me. And I put together, I composed an email, and I put Mr. K in the recipients field and CC'd everybody. And I sent it. Next day, I got the shortest email from Mr. K. Just 2 words: call me. And I said, "Oh yeah, he must love my strategy. He can't wait to hear what I have to say." So I called him right away, and he goes, "Come today." And I went to his office. The first thing he says is, "Who do you think you are?" And I said, "Well, I'm your consultant. You hired me. Who do you think you are?" In my head. And then he said, "You're fired." So thinking back, I didn't understand what happened at that time. But now I teach global leaders effective cross-cultural communication skills. And thinking back and analyzing what happened was, like I said at the very beginning, Japan is a very high context culture, and the US is very low context culture. And Mr. K, assumed that I'm Japanese, I look Japanese, I must speak in the same way he does. And whereas I been in the US for 10 years at that time already. I became Americanized. And as a strategy consultant, I had to be very direct and logical and persuasive, clarify everything. So my communication style became very low context. So there was a huge gap between his communication style and my communication style. So I ended up stepping on his face, as we say it in Japanese, in front of everybody. And I was basically telling everybody, he's wrong, I'm right, because of my communication skill. So my biggest mistake was that I didn't know how to adapt my communication approach so that he will listen, he will open his mind, and he'll say, yes, you have a good point. So that's why adapting your communication approach is really, really crucial in US-Japan businesses.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I feel you 100% when you were telling that story. I have been in so many situations where bridging the gap between high context Japan and low context US, it's sometimes it is very challenging to keep that high and not to run into the trap and saying, okay, business is business. We just do it how we do it here in the US, and then you go to Japan and you think you will just go through and run through open doors, but it's the contrary. You run through a door and the door will never again open for you. They will kindly guide you out and the door will be closed forever. So and this is also something I've learned, that in Japan, there are no second chances. So once you've made a mistake, I think it is basically, how should I call it?
It's going to be very challenging. It takes a long time to reopen that door, because the door that closes behind you or in front of you is very heavy.
Exactly. And that's also why, I mean, it is all interconnected. That is also why Japan is so risk averse. They do not want to fail. In the US, if in a meeting somebody asks you, can you do it? And you have the feeling 60%, yeah, we can do it. Yes, we can do it. In Japan, you would never say we can do it. We have to check. And if you're close to 100%, then you will say, yes, we'll do it. And you will always over deliver. In the US, you start with 60% and you try to get to the 100% until you're done.
Right, exactly.
But there's not that risk, the fear of risk or the fear of failure. Whereas in Japan, as you've explained right now, it is very easy if you do not follow certain steps or certain cultural norms to fail.
Right. Yeah, and those cultural norms or their atarimae, right?
Obvious,
all hidden. Yeah, it's all hidden. It's not stipulated anywhere. So you have to kind of know their unwritten rules. So that's the challenging part. And like you said, the Japanese people are very risk averse, especially in businesses, traditional businesses. So they want to make sure, they want to go back and research what was the cause of this failure, past failure. So what do we have to do so we won't fail again? So they take a lot of time to research, analyze, and placing some rules and regulations so that this mistake will not happen again, or to prevent any mistake from happening. So that's good and bad. I mean, it's not just let's not call it good or bad. It's just the way the Japanese culture is. So if you recognize a different culture as just a difference and be curious about the differences, then you may be a little more open to some ideas like, oh, that difference is interesting. So how can I approach that person? How can I make the door slightly open so that I have a room to go in? So I think I may be jumping ahead of your questions, but I think curiosity when you face differences in cultural differences is the first step to opening the door.
Yes, I fully agree. And I I think some other point that is also important is that when you see that the cultural difference is there in regards to specific Japanese business partners, you really have to consider that it's not, like as you already said, it's not right, it's not wrong, it's different. Because
Right.
the moment that you start judging, you start to block yourself off to better understand how the other or your business partner or your counterpart is thinking and working. So I really like that approach. Now, I want to change gears a little bit because you're a entrepreneur, you're a mother, and you're a business owner. So do you have a morning or evening routine? And if you do, what does it look like? And if you don't, why don't you have one?
I don't really have a routine, and I don't know why I don't have one. Well, maybe I do. Well, my daughter is now 10 years old. She's going to be 11 in later this year, in 2022. And if you have a little child, you would understand how the morning looks like. It's like a war. So yes, if I wake up 10 minutes earlier, maybe I can do meditation every morning. And I try to do that, but somehow even one more minute of sleep is so important to me. I sleep until the last minute, and then I get up, and then it's like nonstop making bento, making breakfast, and get myself ready, get her ready, and making sure that she didn't forget anything, the homework. Oh, what about, did you brush your teeth? And I have to do my hair and makeup, and take her to school. So morning is just like like a tornado. And at nighttime, I work with a lot of clients in Japan. So that means I'm very busy at night. So especially during COVID, everything got remote, which created a lot of opportunities for me. These Japanese companies are more open to have meetings or trainings on Zoom. So it was great, but it was like I got a night job. So nighttime is busy for me. So there is no routine in the morning or in the evening at this point. But what I would love to do is to put in just 5 minutes of meditation to clear my mind and clear my thoughts so that I can start the day fresh or go to bed with clear mind. So I'm going to try to do that.
That's something I can speak from experience. It has positively impacted my life. And how I did it, it was very tough for me because I love to sleep in, and I'm not a morning person, but I had to force myself to wake up before my wife, before my kids, and take my 10-15 minutes to do my meditation. But it's like resetting my operating system. It's like starting, like pushing the reset button and knowing, okay, now I can start fresh. I am proactive in my day, and I don't let others, let's say, command on how I should react. So this is something that has had a positive impact. I can only recommend it.
Yeah. I just wanted to ask you, so does the meditation work better in the morning or in the evening, or it doesn't matter?
The purpose is, I would say, different. In the morning, it is more for you to set the mindset and the mood for the day.
Yeah.
And in the evening, it is more on reflecting and letting out everything that might concern you and that has had some impact on you during the day to have a better sleep. So the evening meditation purpose would be sleep quality improvement, and the morning meditation would be mood control or mind control, if you want to call it, how you approach the new day or the upcoming day.
Yeah, so you can set the tone of the day. Right?
Exactly.
Okay, so I'll try to do it in the morning.
So I see a lot of books behind you. I would like to
Yeah.
ask you, what book would you recommend reading? It doesn't have to be Japan related.
Well, it is Japan related. Oh, well,
Okay.
why not? Well, I have two presentation books published in Japanese, and the first one is Nijuji ni Sobiotose, or in English, Say It in 20 Words. So this is like the presentation textbook. It talks about how to organize your thoughts, using logical thinking technique, and also talks about storytelling technique. So when you want to be persuasive, people don't take action just with a logic. Just like my experience with Mr. K, I was very logical, but I totally forgot about the emotional aspect of presentation or speaking. So this book talks about how to balance out the logical thinking and emotional connection by logical thinking technique and storytelling technique. And the second book focuses more on storytelling in business. Many people think that storytelling is for like TEDx or some inspirational, motivational speaker speeches, but in business, if you want to persuade the other person, and if you want to expect a certain action to be taken, then you really need to touch on their emotion so they will take action. So that's storytelling. So how do you effectively craft a story and tell a story so that you can get your message not only heard, but acted upon? So that's the second book. And actually, the first book, Nijuji Sogyotose, was also translated into Chinese and Korean. So if you have some friends in Korea or China or Taiwan, you can recommend these books.
And it's also available in English?
I'm waiting for the offer from an American publisher.
Okay.
Yeah. And the English book it's not about presentation skills, but it was co-authored with Brian Tracy, the world-renowned consultant, and it's called Success Blueprint. And there are actually 42 authors. Each author contributed one chapter talking about what success looks like. We're talking about the definition of success, and you can read my very personal story.
I'm more than impressed. Brian Tracy as co-author. I don't think there are many people on this earth that are able to say I co-authored a book with Brian Tracy. That's amazing. That's really amazing.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to to receive this opportunity.
So talking about business, almost my last question, because we started with what your experiences are in Japanese business environments and what the challenges are that you see. And we touched on communication, and you mentioned that communication is one of the most important parts and also challenges of working in Japanese business environments. What advice would you give to businesses that want to do business with Japan?
Well, it's related to what I already talked about, but to be able to adapt your communication approach, learn to adapt. So that's the one. If I have to pick one advice, that will be that will be the advice. And the question may come up like, okay, so how do we adapt our communication? What are the steps? So I talk about this 3-step process in my keynote, and it's called the 3 A's. And in effective cross-cultural communications, you have to first acknowledge that there is a difference between you and I. Yes, we're all human, and it's not about we and them, not the division, but in order for us to work together as a we first have to recognize and acknowledge our differences, because every single person in this whole world is uniquely different. But you don't want to be categorized as, oh, you're a type, you're this type, and you're like that, right? So acknowledging that I'm different or they're different. That's the first step. That's the first A, acknowledge. And the second A is analyze. Just like high context, low context, there's another cross-cultural scale that I use in my training programs, and use this scale to analyze where you are, where they are, how big the communication gap is, and where the gap is. By analyzing objectively, you will now realize, oh, okay, that's why this communication mistake happened. Then it goes on to the third A, adapt. Then with this difference, with the analysis of my communication difference with this person, how do I adapt? And now the adapt comes in many different forms. If you're talking one-on-one, maybe you need active listening skills, or you need good questioning technique so that the other person, you can bring out some information, insightful information out of the other person. Or if it's a team communication, maybe you need facilitation skills. So you can, once again, bring out each and every team member's strength and raise the productivity as a team. And if you're presenting, presentation skills or storytelling technique. So depending on what your focus is, what form of communication, I have a whole array of programs. So 3 A's, acknowledge, analyze, and adapt. So with the 3 A's, your cross-cultural businesses will be successful.
Wonderful. I think this is the first time that in one of my interviews, somebody didn't just make a comment on how to do business with Japan, but gave a step-by-step approach on how to actually achieve that and make it a reality. Thank you so much for sharing that. And now I would really like to ask you, how can people know more about you? And maybe you want to share your training programs that you just mentioned.
Yes, thank you. So if you're in the US, or if you don't speak Japanese, my website is Natsuyo Lipschutz, all spelled out, natsuyolipschutz.us, and you can get information from there. And if you're in Japan, or if you read Japanese, btspeaking.com, B as in boy, T as in Tom, speaking.com. And you can get all kinds of services from corporate trainings, private coaching, e-learning programs, webinars, books, and some video contents, and blog articles. But I want to highlight my e-learning program. It's a self-guided e-learning program called The Art of Persuasive Speaking in Global Business. And it has an intro course and master course. An intro course covers all the basics and foundational skills of presentation skills. And in the master course, it touches on the 3 A's I just mentioned, the cross-cultural communication aspect, and also digging deeper into the logical thinking, storytelling technique called the 6 C's of effective storytelling. And ultimately, as a speaker, you want to find your own voice. You want to find your own voice and your own style. So how do you find that? So it's all in master course. So it's a self-guided program, so you can learn at your own pace, and it's all in English. So and I'm speaking in easy English, so it should be easy to understand and easy to navigate as well. So the Art of Persuasive Speaking in Global Business is the place to start. And you can get the information under natsuyolipschutz.us e-learning. It's under here. Or if you're looking at the Japanese side, you can also find the e-learning program in Japanese. And you can you have a little preview of what it looks like within this e-learning course. So this just like present through. This is the video and what it looks like inside. So I would highly recommend that you start with this e-learning program. And if you want to take it to the next level, I'm open to private coaching as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Natsuyo. I can tell all the viewers or listeners that only the keynote that is freely available on Natsuyo's website has already so much value that I highly encourage everybody to check out her website and her training programs. If you want to become a more confident speaker, if you want to become a better business person, then this site, those resources are for you. Natsuyo, again, thank you so much for all the valuable information that you've shared with us today. I'm very grateful that you could join me today. To all the viewers and listeners, thank you for watching or listening, and see you all in the next one.
Thanks for having me. See you all.